Hey guys! Today on the forum stage, we are excited to highlight 10 incredible storytellers, activists, and advocates. But before we welcome them up, we want to give thanks to Tarina Ahuja, who started this event last year, to create a space for students to explore how their identities have impacted their journey in public service.
Within these brick walls, we can gather as we have all done today. We can dream and imagine a better future. We can build a collective vision for change and justice. We can blueprint the world that we want to live in. But our community does not have to stay within the confines of these walls. We can take these lessons from the stories today and amplify them throughout our community, throughout the world. I invite you to experience your emotions today, to listen, to think, and to have these thoughts mobilize you into action and public service. My name is Kashish Bastola.
And my name is Layla Nasher, and we are excited to welcome you all to the IOP's second Our Narratives Showcase. We hope that our narratives today will inspire you to pursue a pathway of your own. Following the speeches, we invite you all to a reception with our speakers in room L166 over there. And without further ado, we welcome up our first speaker.
حرية سلام وعدالة مدنية خيار الشعب. Freedom, peace, justice, civilian is the people's choice. These were the words I chanted on June 30th of 2019. It was the 30-year anniversary of dictator Umar al-Bashir's coup. It was also my first time protesting on the ground as a part of the Sudanese Democratic Revolution. But we weren't protesting against al-Bashir. He'd been deposed from power 2 months earlier. Our fight was against the military, who just 3 weeks prior, on the 29th day of the holy month of Ramadan, had violently dispersed the sit-in taking place in front of the military headquarters, and who'd taken power after al-Bashir's deposal. Hundreds of people were massacred, tents burned to the ground, bodies thrown into the Nile, and those who survived either raped or disappeared. The nation was plunged into a communications blackout and borders temporarily closed. There is something quite unique about staring down the barrels of machine guns on tanks. Soldiers watching you unsmiling. Your active knowledge that they are awaiting the orders to fire, yet choosing to continue to protest and to march because you have decided that this is a cause worth giving your life for. I left Sudan that summer, having witnessed the signing of a historic deal between the civilians and military that brought in the nation's first transitional government in 3 decades. A year later, however, things were no longer looking as optimistic. COVID had hit, and the economic, political, and social situation continued to deteriorate. In April of 2021, I lost both of my grandfathers, the 2 men who'd spent hours talking to me about Sudan's history and its trajectory within the span of less than a week. In any functioning state, they would have been in the hospital. In Sudan, hospitals are where you go to die. 2 months later, my cousin Ubay, who'd been an older brother to me my whole life, who'd introduced me to cola gummies and tried to teach me how to swim, but failed, was brutally murdered in Khartoum. His death a consequence of state violence and failure. I continued to lose people and entered my junior year in a state of anger and grief and despair. The nation I had been prepared to give my life for had come to collect one by one. In October of 2021, a coup took place in Sudan, and the military overthrew its civilian counterparts. I spent days locked in my room, eyes glued to the screens of Al Jazeera Mubashir for any sort of news of what was happening to my family. But what kept me from falling apart was the organizing of the Sudanese Boston community. I couldn't fall apart. I couldn't fall apart when the last words my aunt had told me before the communications blackout was to get the news out of what was happening in Sudan. And so, in this collective community of mourning and anger and shock, we began to organize. We began to raise awareness, to protest, to march for our nation, to get the news out of what was happening. And it was in this space, and through that fire, that I took on the greatest journey of resistance and healing and public service and love I could have ever dedicated to Sudan. My senior thesis. By my junior spring, I'd begun to plan. And this past summer, I spent researching, 3 weeks of which were in Sudan, interviewing activists and dissidents and leaders on the ground. During that time, though, a friend at MIT, who'd been the heart and soul of the Boston Sudanese community, and who I discussed my thesis with in its planning stages, was shot and killed by the military in Sudan. And so, I stand before you today, 2 years after the deaths of my grandfathers, 2 years after the murder of Ubay, 4 months after the conclusion of his murder trial, and 8 months after the killing of Muhammad, to tell you my story of healing and of resistance through the grief and the anger and the trauma. On March 8th, I submitted to the government department my senior thesis entitled Dictating Democracy, the struggle for freedom, peace, and justice through the rise and fall of democracy in post-independent Sudan. But I didn't just submit a thesis. I submitted what is the most comprehensive piece of academic work that's ever been produced on Sudan, my personal journey of healing and the greatest act of love and resistance and public service I could have ever dedicated to my nation. I tell you my story today because it's not just mine. Exactly 1 week ago, I just finished praying Fajr, the morning prayer, on the Charles River Bridge with the rest of the Muslim community here, when I received a phone call from my aunt. Still on the bridge, I stepped away from my friends and began to relive the past 4 years of my life as she told me about how a war had broken out in Sudan. The past week has been spent by my family without electricity and without water, with bombs raining down on them, and with bullets found in their homes. There are only 20 hospitals left servicing the nation's capital with a population of 6.3 million people. And yet, I stand here today with the lessons I've taken from the past 4 years, with the lessons I've taken from the Sudanese Democratic Revolution. And so yes, my past week has been spent in fear and in tears, but it's also been spent advocating for Sudan, fundraising for the nation. You can see the flyers on your chairs, you can see the QR code up there. I tell my story today because it's not just mine. It's the story of every diaspora kid, every international student, everyone who's ever called somewhere else home. We all face this inherent paradox of resistance when we can't be there in person. But I'm here to tell you that resistance and healing comes in all sorts of forms. So I stand here today, in spite of everything, believing in the possibility of a democratic Sudan in my lifetime, pledging to work towards that cause. And I do this in honor of every martyr that's given their life for Sudan. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Cody, and I'm a CODA. Being raised with two deaf parents, I identify as a child of deaf adults, also known as a CODA. My first language was American Sign Language. This was the very language I used to communicate with my parents and to translate for them on a daily basis in almost every public setting. And growing up, I had to navigate through many identities, whether it be my Asian American identity or my identity as a CODA. And navigating through both the hearing and deaf communities, I didn't understand my role as a CODA until one day, my dad was pulled over by a cop, supposedly for a traffic violation. And as the cop walked towards our car, I saw my dad anxiously grab a laminated plastic card from the glove box. And on this card, it said, "I am deaf, I cannot hear you, I need a translator." The police officer walked towards our car. My dad rolled down the window and told me, translate, please. And me as a very young boy, I didn't understand why I had to translate, but I asked him, why do we need this card? I've never seen this card before. To which my dad said, it's because I'm scared the police officer will not understand me, and we need a translator. So the police officer went over to the car and looked at me, and me, a very young boy at the time, frankly trying to translate for my parents. I told the police officer that my dad was deaf, he cannot understand you, I'm here to translate for you. The police officer just looked at me and my dad, complete silence, turned around and walked back towards the car. And to this day, I don't know why the police officer stopped us, I don't know why we had that traffic violation, and I didn't understand at that time why me, a 12-year-old boy, had to navigate through the police system because of an accessible society that we have created for differently abled people. This is one of the few events in my life that inspired me to advocate and to increase visibility for differently abled people in society, including my parents. In high school and college, I did this through public service work. And one story I wanted to share is my public service work in the IOP Civics program. The IOP Civics program is an educational outreach program in which I and two other undergrads go out into the Boston public schools and teach an American civics and history course. I was really excited because this is one of the very first times I had the opportunity to teach for the first time. And upon introductions, I introduced myself to the teacher introduced herself to us, and after that, she also introduced this one student named Jackie. Jackie was a young, hard of hearing student that was just learning ASL. And this is really exciting for me because this is like the very first time I met someone that knew ASL, that knew anyone in the deaf or hard of hearing community in Boston, ever since moving here 2 years ago. So surprisingly, the teacher took me and Jackie out in the hallway in private so we can have this nice little conversation. And I told Jackie, "Hi, how are you doing?" "I'm doing good. It's nice to meet you." Jackie responded in an absolute excitement. I could swear if you saw her smile, you would be smiling as much as I will. And I just saw her excitement because this was probably also her first time seeing someone that knew ASL, that knew someone in the deaf community, that knew someone that also advocated for her visibility. So I was inspired. Next week, I was gonna introduce some basic ASL to the classrooms, teach some basic ASL phrases like good morning or good afternoon. And slowly, I started to reveal my identity as a CODA to the classroom. I started to share my identity as a CODA, that I knew I was a person that knew ASL as my first language. And the kids loved it. The kids were so excited, not only to learn about my identity, but to learn more about ASL and to learn more about Jackie's identity. And some kids started to ask me how to say certain phrases in sign language. And that was absolutely amazing because one of the most heartwarming experiences I ever had during my time in civics was one time Jackie's close classmate walked in one early morning she had this giant textbook, this dictionary of basic ASL vocabulary and ASL phrases. And she told me from last week's lesson that she was inspired by the fact that I knew ASL. She was inspired that she asked her parents to buy this book. And immediately, 5 minutes after, Jackie walked in and they started having a full conversation in ASL. The classmate was, Jackie, how are you doing? I'm doing good. Jackie was also, I'm doing good. How's your morning? And this is, I swear, if you can see her smile was amazing. And this was one moment that really reminded me why I identify as a coder, why I'm proud of being a coder, why I'm proud of Jackie's identity as a hard of hearing student. And it reminds me why I am a coder and why I constantly share my identity is to increase visibility and to advocate for differently able people in society. It makes me proud to say that I have deaf parents. It makes me proud to say I know ASL as my first language. It makes me proud to continue sharing my identity to others that don't know about it. Because ultimately, I encourage all of y'all to share a bit of your identity because ultimately, that's what makes our community stronger, more understanding, and more tolerable of others. Thank you.
On March 16th, 1988, Iraqi dictator Saddam Hussein gassed the Kurdish city of Halabja. My mom, just 6 years old, watched her city, her land, her people obliterated by the occupying forces of Iraq. 33 years later, we both stood in that same land. It was my first time in Kurdistan. We were looking out to the sunflower fields of Halabja, which gave us another reason to love the home of our ancestors so much. But we were also standing under the same state, reliving the reality of what it means to be Kurdish under occupation. I, just 16 years old, had to reckon with another reality, that I am both Arab and Kurdish. These two identities, as I've been told growing up, and I'm still being told, can only work at odds with one another. My mom began sharing her stories of her childhood with me when I was around 10 years old. She told me about her experience fleeing from city to city, country to country, subjected to the displacement that happens at the hands of occupation. She, along with my Syrian Arab dad, taught me to speak up for the causes I care about, no matter the cost. But what came with growing up in a mixed ethnicity household, especially a Kurdish Arab household, was tension, frustration, and a perpetual conflict of identity. In October of 2019, I went to my first protest in Chicago. Erdogan had just released thousands of ISIS fighters into Rojava, or Western Kurdistan, northeastern Syria. As we chanted, Jin, Jian, Azadi, or women, life, freedom, I felt the power of community and solidarity. As we chanted this phrase, emblematic of the women who continue to preserve our homeland, I felt a sliver of hope. I wanted to see this power, this solidarity manifest in ways I hadn't encountered before. So I continued to push for the recognition of my people, to advocate for Kurdistan and Syria through one of my biggest passions, writing. I wrote about the problems of US intervention in Syria. I wrote about the 1988 Halabja massacre, about the Kurdish women who fought against ISIS. Yet, one week, I would put too much attention into Kurdistan. The next, it almost seemed like I only identified as Arab. I even had a running joke with my family that this is feeling like more of a Kurdish week. I'm feeling a little more Arab today. It was always either or. And this persisted. In September of 2022, Kurdish woman Jina Amini from Saqiz in the Kurdistan province of Iran was murdered by the Iranian morality police. You might know her as Mahsa Amini by her regime name, because apparently being Kurdish is a crime in Iran. Soon after her death, the people of Rojhelat, or Eastern Kurdistan, chanted once again, Jin, Jian, Azadi. However, this phrase was soon co-opted and claimed as an Iranian one, and only an Iranian one, just like her name. I ran into this issue in my own organizing spaces. I noticed that I was the only one who would advocate for not only the centering of Kurdish voices, but merely the inclusion of Kurdish voices. And in some ways, I saw this working. Together, we chanted Jin, Jian, Azadi. We repeated Gina's Kurdish name, her real name. And I felt this hope once again. But again, came this guilt, this feeling that by advocating for Kurdistan, I was abandoning my Arab identity. But this should not be the reality. I advocate for Kurdistan for so many reasons, one of them being that no one else will. So few people know about the occupation, and many of those who do stand off to the side and watch it happen or deny it. The narratives of Kurdistan in the homeland and in the diaspora need to be uplifted. Yet, why do I always feel the need to overcompensate for speaking up for a group of people who have been silenced for decades and silenced to this day? This fear of solidarity, this fear of breaking barriers, is a root cause of this tainted rhetoric about my identities. I am both Kurdish and Arab. When I advocate for Kurdistan, I advocate as a Kurdish and Arab woman. When I advocate for Syria, I do so as a Kurdish and Arab woman. My identities, my parents' teachings of my cultures, are the reason I am able to stand on this stage and continue to tell you that we exist and that we deserve freedom. Through writing, organizing, and advocacy, I can slowly feel the barriers put up by people who view my identity as a recipe for chaos crumble to the ground. I am not just Arab, and I am not just Kurdish. I am Kurdish and Arab. And these two identities are what allow me to see that a future of liberation can be tangible. These two identities are what allow me to realize that it's okay to chant free Kurdistan and free Palestine in the same breath. This is not just my narrative. This is a narrative rooted in Syria and Kurdistan. This is a narrative of diaspora. It's a narrative that is anti-imperialist, anti-colonial, and allows us to envision this future of freedom. It is a narrative that allows me to say, Ana Suriya and Min Kurdam. Thank you.
4%. Now, when you think of 4%, you might think of Harvard's acceptance rate or maybe the class rank in which you graduated. But 4% for me is life or death. 4% for me is whether you'll eat or starve. For me, 4% is the slight chance that you'll never have to dodge a bullet or that you'll spend more time attending more graduations than funerals. 4% is a statistic that says that if you are born below the poverty line in Atlanta, Georgia, that you will make it out. I didn't always have stability growing up until I got to middle school, and we moved back to the community that my mom was raised in, my South Atlanta community. Now, societal issues exist here, including those that we talk about in the IOP discussions, but again, they're real life for me. It's poverty, it's food insecurity, it's homelessness, it's inequitable education, And these reflect the lives of South Atlanta residents. It was losing Pinky and Zachariah to gun violence. It was us having to walk through a metal detector every day just to get inside of a classroom. It was my principal prioritizing us graduating over telling us that we could have college preparation because we got to make sure that kids walk across the stage. It was us attending those funerals. So what about our parents, right? Because these are just the lives of our students. Well, our parents, they spent their lives neglecting themselves and their health, but not because it was a 2-month wait period, but because it was unaffordable. They bargained with the landlord. They worked those 12-hour shifts. We didn't have a PTA. They are the true superheroes without the capes. My mom, she's right there, by the way. She is my superhero without the cape. You see, my mom deprived herself of meals so that me and my sister could eat. She built a bedroom inside of our living room so that me and my sister didn't argue about sharing a room. My mother worked those 12-hour shifts proudly. She was our fixer. She fixed the screens and the ovens and whatever we broke in the house. She also balanced an online degree. We shared laptops so that we could both graduate on time. She also cared for my disabled grandmother. South Atlanta is a place where real superheroes live and die. They work tirelessly and unselfishly so that we can break those cycles, even if they don't get to witness it. I believe that through our losses within my community, that we've learned as that wanting to have that and being that 4%, how to lose, but also to turn our pain into our purpose. So, I'm sorry. Thank you. So, while we watched my friends become RIP posts and, no justice brought to their families, of course, I also had to endure the loss of my father and my stepfather, as well as my cousin in my sophomore year of high school. I turned my losses into what I knew would be wins for my community. I believe that my mom, again, is the reason why I got into education, and she's my inspiration for all the work that I've done. I started in 2020 interning with my superintendent, and I asked her, why do they have more than we have, and we're in the same school district? Why don't we get to see the resources? Why don't we have safety? Why do I have to walk through a classroom, and in order to get to that classroom, I have to go through a metal detector? And she gave me the opportunity to create a documentary, and I visited every high school in my school district, Atlanta Public Schools. And we interviewed students and asked them what they wanted to see. How can we use unity as a way to be the voice for the voiceless? It prompted in school committees being created. I was able to allocate $3 million to families over the pandemic. We opened the Center for Equity and Social Justice, which has the professionals that are geared towards remedying those inequities in our community. I also have the proud honor to have served as the chairwoman for the Student Advisory Council for the Atlanta Board of Education, which serves 50,000 students in our school district. Further that year, I became a part of this organization called the Young Mobilizers, where we teach students how to advocate for themselves in their communities. We expose them to those things that they don't get to see because we don't get to go outside of Atlanta. We were able to create a campaign called the Protect the Homeless Atlanta campaign, in which we rallied for over 600 families that were displaced during the pandemic, and we got them resources. I now have the opportunity to work with Councilman Antonio Lewis on a larger scale so that we can continue to protect families, because they also deserve to have life. So now that you've heard about the 4%, because obviously I'm here, right? What about that 96% that we don't get to see? Well, now that I've told you our stories, it starts with you. You see, my community sees me as an investment, as the first to come from my family, from my community, from my school. I want to pour into their glasses the same way they poured into mine. I believe they are just as deserving. I mean, somebody told me to apply here 2 days before the deadline because I was capable, even if it wasn't the SAT scores, even if it wasn't the GPA, but you are a leader in your community, Allison. We want you to be able to bring people with you. I want to be able to bring people with me. Being ignorant of these things that transpire will do nothing for us. So, at Harvard faculty, students, I want you to use your voice to help us, because we are just as deserving of life, of liberty, of the pursuit of happiness, and they deserve to be here. Thank you.
Is it on? Oh, it is on, sorry. When I was preparing to advocate in front of my local government for the first time, I was offered no shortage of tips, tricks, and best practices. I was told what a proper business casual outfit would look like, how to recite facts and figures without coming off too memorized, and even how to offer the firmest handshake possible. But of all the wisdom that was bestowed upon me about advocacy work, the advice that stuck with me the most was a tip to make legislative acts in the present tense. Over the years, as I advocated for more funding to combat youth unhousedness, and even for statewide flavored nicotine bans, I found that the present tense was a very effective rhetorical tool. I loved being able to present change not as something that happened in the past or could happen in the future, but something that legislators could buy into right now. But over the years, while I thought I had settled into using the present tense, that all changed on November 14th, 2022, when my dear friend and blockmate Luke Ballstad lost his life to suicide. The night of his passing, dozens gathered in Quincy House. One by one, they went around and shared wonderful stories about Luke and his life. When it was my turn, I couldn't think of a poignant reflection. All I said was, I don't know how to talk about someone I knew to be so alive in the past tense. And it wasn't just that my years of public speaking and advocacy training failed me in that moment. It was because there was no tense, no statistic, no fact or figure that could capture the tragedy at hand, the tragedy of a brilliant life lost at 19. But that didn't stop people, well-meaning people familiar with my work, from asking what I was going to do about the loss. If because Luke was proud to be gay, if there was something to do at the intersection of queer and mental health issues, if there was something to be done about Harvard because he was a Harvard student, and what asks of the administration I might have. And as uncomfortable as I was speaking in the past tense, I knew that if I decided to be speaking about Luke, it wouldn't be defined by the tense I used or how I said what I was going to be say. It would be decided by what I said to celebrate Luke's life. As I share memories of him as someone whose eyes lit up when he talked to you about his microbiome research, whose diligent work ethic was maintained by many a Celsius energy drink and Dunkin' large iced coffee, as someone who was proud to lead hikes with the Harvard Outdoors Club and spent many a night working overnight shifts at the Harvard Square homeless shelter. This is what will define the work I do about Luke and how I honor him in advocacy. But speaking out about Luke hasn't stopped me from reflecting further on my relationship to the past tense. I am regretful of past generalizations I used to make about real people that can't just be defined by facts and figures and statistics. I hope to be meaningful in the generalizations I make when I make a public service work. The personal is political for so many of us, but it has to be political without those same things becoming impersonal to us for the sake of change. Even though my work is now more defined by content than it is rhetoric, it doesn't stop me from still thinking about that past tense and thinking about what I would say to Luke about it. I think if I could talk to him now, I'd say, Luke, I think I was so scared of talking about you in the past tense because it underscores how badly I wish I could talk to you in the present if you were still here. But the beautiful thing about the past tense is that it's the tense we use to celebrate your life. And in every story I share, every bill I advocate for, each day I cherish, I'll never stop celebrating your life and how alive you were. Thank you.
Guilty, guilty, guilty. These were the words that condemned both of my mothers to prison when I was 2 years old for first-degree murder. On October 5th, 2005, I would be ripped from Crying Arms, my childhood home, and all of my mother's love. This is when I was introduced to the American foster care system. I would move in with a new family, being the only person of color in an all-white household in the lowest income neighborhood of my community, Spokane, Washington. Statistically, I was destined to fail, whether that was getting addicted to drugs like my mother's, dropping out of school like the plethora of my classmates who I would not see the following year, or ending up in the school-to-prison pipeline. I should not be here. So, why am I? Education is the lifeline that I needed. School became a place for me in which I could break past the barriers that my early childhood had set on me. Within the walls of my school, I had a safe space where I could truly be myself. Instead of becoming a statistic, I excelled in statistics, in math, in writing, and in leadership. But when the school bell rang and I made my mile journey back home, my true reality would set in. Guilty, guilty, guilty are the words that floated around in my mind as I fell down the wood steps. As my skin stung after the hand of those who were supposed to protect me met my face, and in the worst of times, when those same hands would come back stronger and longer as my breath would become weaker and shorter until I simply could not hear the words any longer. This was my reality. I was forced into a double life where I craved the attention and love that I was missing at home from my peers and classmates, each day fearing the school bell that would take this all away. And soon, this love and attention that I so desperately craved from those around me would be unattainable as well. Guilty, guilty, guilty is how I felt as the homophobic slurs of my classmates filled my mind. Their echoes getting louder and louder and louder and louder until I simply could not take it any longer. I wanted to die. I tried and I failed. Glorious, gentle, genuine. Y'all thought I was going to say guilty, didn't you? That would have been a fair conclusion. But on January 20th, 2020, I realized that I was so many beautiful things in this world, and guilty was sure as hell not one of them. It was through the generosity and kindness of those around me, the communities I created, and the families I formed that I am the Andre in front of each of you today. Kindness is something that stuck with me. Kindness. Choosing kind is something so small yet overlooked in our world. In the words of Augie Pullman from the movie Wonder, when given the choice between being right or being kind, choose kind. This is an ideal that I have dedicated my life to and has been integral in the advocacy, outreach, and leadership that I exhibit today. And the truth is, I am a statistic. I'm one of the 1.7 million children in the United States with incarcerated parents. One of the 397,000 children who are actively in the foster care system, not to mention the ones who aged out. Part of the 45% of LGBTQ+ youth who seriously consider suicide each year. One of the 700,000 children actively homeless alone in the United States. But I'm also the only one of me. And now I use these statistics to make positive changes in my community. And I do this in the best way that I know how, through education. For the rest of high school, you would see me interning for city council to combat homelessness within my community, serving on the Spokane Public Schools school board as the voice of over 30,000 students within my district, and of course, still smiling and waving to each and every person who got me to where I am today. I still exhibit this dedication to leadership in my classes, enrolling in courses here at Harvard that have allowed me to learn about prison abolitionism, race, gender, and sexuality discrimination in our country, and am actively working to dismantle the historically white, straight, male, and affluent spaces here on this university. As I stand in front of you right now, I serve on the board of HMC Boston, HMC San Francisco, and HMC Europe, where I'm able to use my passion for education to uplift the next generation of civil servants through policy. Here within the IOP, can't forget about that, I have the privilege of serving as the co-director of community engagement for fellows and study groups, where I'm able to create diverse, inclusive, and welcoming spaces for all people on this campus. And now, as I draft my speech that I will give in front of the Washington State Parole and Pardons Board, advocating for my mother's release in just a short month and a half. Now I look to the future and I see one filled with hope through kindness. I plan to go to law school and I envision a world in which I am fighting for those who are the victims of the foster care system, advocating for LGBTQ+ rights, and working to dismantle the prison industrial complex that plagues our country today. So, the changes that we want to see start with all of us. And I believe that the change that we can make happens through education. This doesn't mean just sending our kids to school and saying, we'll leave it there. This means truly giving them the tools needed to succeed. Stable housing, nourishing food, advocates, love, care, kindness, and so much more. Education truly has the ability to empower everyone in our world. It's about time we let it, and if we don't, we are the guilty ones. Thank you.
Take care of each other. I think if there's one philosophy by which I define my life, it'd be this: take care of each other. And it's mine, but I certainly didn't come up with it on my own. I'm a cancer survivor, which means that the very fact that I'm standing right here in front of all of you today is emblematic of the tremendous extent of human care. And I'll never be able to properly thank each and every person who's brought me to where I am today, but right now, I want to talk about one person in particular. Anne-Marie, my teacher in the pediatric cancer ward. So, I grew up in a hospital, which means that my childhood was a bit different. I had bone cancer in my leg, which meant that I couldn't walk, and I was tied to the same hospital bed, same hospital room, same stream of chemo, surgeries, treatment. And those days were hard. But if there's one thing that always made them just a bit easier, it was my lessons with Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie was different. She wasn't a ray of sunshine, but a beam of one. Where there was pain, she was joy. Where there was monotony, she was excitement. And I gotta say, if Anne-Marie was there, I can't say my childhood was that different. I had a couple friends. We played games. We had our lessons. We had our normal. But if there's one difference about friendship in the cancer ward, it's that you shouldn't ask questions when people leave. After I'd gone into remission, I was talking to my mom one day, and I asked her how my friend was doing. I didn't like the answer. Her name was Emily, and one day when we were in the hospital together, the doctors told her there's nothing more they could do for her and send her home. And her dad called each and every hospital in the entire city, begging, pleading for something he never found. And I think about that, or I think it affected me. Because the next time I went back to the hospital for my check-ins, for my scans, everything was so heavy, surrounded by small bodies in tiny hospital gowns, carrying more pain, more weight than they could ever carry. I lost it. In the middle of the day, in the middle of public, in the middle of this hospital floor, I broke down into crying, tearing sobs, tearing apart with grief, with mourning of lives that had never been lived. And somehow, in this impossible moment, some way, again, it was Anne-Marie. She came to me, held me so softly, so gently, and in that moment in her arms, I couldn't understand her. I couldn't understand how or why she does this, why she comes to a place like this of loss and death and despair and chooses joy, chooses us, chooses me. Even in this very moment when her arms must be so full, she reaches out to me. How much pain has she smiled through? How much weight does she carry? How many students has she lost? And in that moment, I couldn't understand her, but what I did understand was the infinity of what it meant to me. And I made a decision that whatever this was, I wanted to do it too. To be just as recklessly, irrationally, humanly compassionate as Anne-Marie. After this, someone asked me to be a patient ambassador for the hospital. And I was scared. I wanted to say no. This would involve giving a speech in front of hundreds of people, sharing my story, rallying support. But how could I possibly do that? How could I possibly give myself, give my sorrow, give my grief, watch people see me as I am and be okay with that? But maybe that day, I made a promise. Maybe to Anne-Marie and maybe to myself. So I said yes. I went up there, I gave my speech, I put all of myself on a plate and I handed it to the people in front of me. I asked them to care and they did. We raised over $20,000 that day. This summer, I'm going back to the hospital to work in their immigrant health and cancer disparity service. And to be honest, it's painful. It's painful for me to go back there. And I can't exactly tell you why I do this. I think it's hard for us to pinpoint why we take on pain for the sake of others. But maybe it's because in this deafening noise of life, of death, of complexity, of confusion, of pain that never makes any sense,
there's still just one voice that rings clear in my mind. One voice that says, choose joy in despair. Choose kindness in cruelty. Take care of others because we take care of each other. Thank you.
Gunshots. They echo from all around me. I turn around to face soldiers. Soldiers running toward the presidential palace, Ark, in Kabul, with their hands tightly wrapped around their Kalashnikovs. It was stories like this that I listened to growing up. Stories that were more turbulent than any Hollywood movie you could imagine, with the only difference that they were the reality of others. For my mother, for my father, and for so many other Afghans whose story has remained untold. During my childhood, I was exposed to the complete opposite of what my parents had experienced. I've always tried to imagine myself in the position of my father when he saw the soldiers right next to his school at the presidential palace when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979. When my dad was forced to join the Afghan military, or when my parents escaped the Taliban. However, I was born in a peaceful suburban town in northern Germany, far away from my origins. And apart from my parents' stories, the only occasion I would come across Afghanistan was when I was confronted by the horrifying pictures and videos of Taliban whipping women on the streets, beheading innocent citizens, of the terrorist explosions, burning our cities, our people, our souls. However, I knew that there was so much more to Afghanistan, like its rich history and culture, the breathtaking nature encompassing vast areas of mountains and rivers, let alone its diversity. Don't even get me started on the number of times people have asked me, "Are you really Afghan? But you don't look Afghan." But Afghanistan is diverse in every sense, and it is home to more than 14 different ethnic groups. But frankly, at times I would still question it. Could I even consider myself Afghan if I had never been to the country, never experienced the same things other Afghans have? There was just something so deeply internal that made me feel connected to my roots. Admittedly, my connections were scarce, not only in terms of my experiences, but even my own family. My one and only grandfather I got to know was brutally assassinated by the Taliban when he went to visit the country a couple of years ago. And keeping in touch with other relatives also wasn't as simple. War doesn't show any mercy. Instead, it indifferently destroys families like glasses shattered and forcefully spread all over the world. I remember one day watching the news with my parents from our warm, comfortable living room and witnessing how other Afghans 3,000 miles away from me were clinging on to the planes of the US Air Force. The lucky ones did not get a hold of it and were left behind. Others fell off the wings of the plane after its departure, and even others froze to death up in the air. I will never be able to erase these images from my mind. Images that still make a cold shiver run down my spine. But above all, they made me feel one thing: guilt. How could I just sit here while other Afghans are risking their lives just to be in the same position as I am, just to be in safety? I was absorbing my liberty to its fullest, whether it was expressed in the form of playing soccer as a woman, enjoying my education, or participating in protests and politics, while other Afghan women were suffering under the claws of the Taliban, while Afghanistan was vainly trying to deter from its own demise. However, I was lucky to be surrounded by brave role models, the most significant ones being my parents. My parents who saw their own friends being hit by rockets right next to them but still survived. My parents who saw their own brothers and sisters taking their last breath of air in their arms but still survived. My parents who left behind their medical degrees because it was not accepted when they came to Germany. Their families, their entire lives. My parents who started at zero and worked hard to build a future for themselves, but especially for us, for their children. Or take my aunt, for instance, who recently moved back from New York to Afghanistan as a woman, alone, to help her country. My aunt, whom I worry about every day while she negotiates human rights with a group as inhumane as the Taliban. My aunt, who, when asked by the Taliban where her mahram, so her husband, was, responded, "I am my own mahram." And with these stories in my mind, I cannot just waste my opportunities. Guilt and grief alone won't bring about change. So instead, I learned to channel it into action. The unlived lives of my parents have shaped my motivation and my ambitious mindset. Today, I'm grateful for all the people surrounding me here and in Germany, my family, my friends, my teachers. I'm grateful for my freedom. Today, I know that I can be both German and Afghan, because today I know that I do not have to choose. Both identities have given me so much that I want to give back to both Germany and Afghanistan. I leverage my voice for the ones who are deprived of theirs and protest for Afghan women's rights. And as a Muslim, I joined the Christian Democratic Party of Germany because I am a firm believer that there is so much more that unites us than what divides us. Regardless of religion, nationality, identity, we all share the same common values. And as politicians, it is our common job to do good for society. Afghanistan has shown me how sacred education and democracy are. So I decided to participate in politics and run for office in my town in Germany. And after a demanding period of campaigning while I was still in high school, I won, and I became the youngest counselor in my town. Even a call from another candidate trying to convince me that a young girl like me who's still in high school won't be able to handle it did not keep me, but in contrast, pushed me even further to pursue to take responsibility as a municipal politician, to serve my community, and to protect our democratic values. Because Afghanistan has shown that they cannot be taken for granted. But my path is not over yet. I will continue to give back to society. And I know that Afghanistan might seem hopeless to many, but if I am one thing, then it is optimistic. I am optimistic about the future of Afghanistan because I am optimistic about what we all can do together. We have the opportunity to raise our voice because we cannot forget countries like Afghanistan, like Syria, like Sudan, which perish while we blindly progress. It is in our power to speak up, to act, and how we would say in Farsi, to bakhair, create a world of peace and justice together. Thank you.
At the age of 5, I was a mere preschooler, but I became too familiar with the pain of having my mother stripped away from me. What had my mother done wrong? On a seemingly normal morning, I woke up and she just wasn't there. ¿A dónde está mi ma? Where is my mom? ¿Por qué no está aquí? Why isn't she here? Never had there been a question about my mother's whereabouts, and now she just wasn't here. Abuelita, ¿por qué no está aquí? Grandma, why isn't she here? Grandmother, please explain to the 5-year-old child that her mother has gone away to an entirely different country. But first explain to this child what a country is. Explain to her the legal implications of her mother being on US land. How do you do this? You just can't. I am from Texas, but my mother is a Mexican immigrant. So she was on a journey to attain her US residency, the precursor to becoming a US citizen. On the day of my mother's departure, I no longer felt human. For 90 days, I was barely surviving. For 90 days, I did not go to preschool. The first day back to school, after my mother had left, was odd. My grandmother woke me up, and I felt that going back to school would be betrayal. How could I go on and live a happy life in preschool when I was just gonna go back home and feel so isolated? How could I pretend to be okay when my mother was my main caregiver and she just was no longer there? How could I be a kid and have mindless fun when I was too aware of the reality bestowed upon me? At the age of 5, I had lost that innocence. Every waking moment, I was angry. I did not know how to handle my emotions well because all that I was feeling was too strong. So mornings were the hardest. One morning, I tried to call my mom using the home phone, and as hot tears rolled down my cheeks, my family refused to give me her phone number. Of course, it makes sense looking back that they wouldn't want me to talk to her when I was in this condition because it would hurt her and it would hurt me. So they wanted to protect us both. So I grabbed this home phone, this brick-like phone, and I smashed it with all my 5-year-old might, and I wasn't that strong. And all I wanted was to hear my mother's voice. So the turning point was the day that she stepped back onto US soil. On the 90th day, I was told that my mother would be coming back. And I actually went to school that day, after 90 days. As I was waiting for my uncle to pick me up from school that day, I was a nervous little 5-year-old. I was hopeful that my mom did not know of all the angry fits that I threw, but that was trumped by the fact that my mother would be coming back. So I now know that my mother also struggled too with the idea of leaving me behind. That's why she couldn't bring herself to say goodbye to me. That's why she had to disappear. With an immigrant's disappearance, all suffer. I suffered, my mother suffered, our whole family ached. She took a necessary risk though. If she had not fought through the tough times back then, her being in the US now would not have been guaranteed. Over the next couple of years, I became curious about the law and the way that immigration system worked here. The summer of 2021 was the first time I interned at a law firm. This was the first time where I felt like my presence in the workplace meant something both to me and my family. And in the fall, I will be working with the Right to Immigration Institute to become a Department of Justice accredited representative to help low-income immigrants attain their citizenship. So, yeah. So my drive stems from a very personal place. I think it is important to acknowledge that immigrants are people. They're people who care for each other as well as one another. We care for immigrants and they care for us because they are people. So they are not entities that should just be drawn out of the country because every person holds value. And their value is irreplaceable. As much as all your mothers hold irreplaceable value, mine is irreplaceable too. Because I realized at an early age that I wanted to help those like my mother, I was pushed to do well both inside and outside of school. And now I get to say that as a daughter of immigrants, I am studying computer science and philosophy at Harvard. So. My goal in sharing my story is that the children of immigrants are heard and that they acknowledge that the feats that we all experience merely from our parents existing on US land are understandable, and the feats that we may have suffered from the legal implications are just a journey. So I am aware that the story of those affected can be a taboo subject because exposure of our parents' statuses can be dangerous for the whole family. So I hope that those in this situation recognize that our fear is great, but our strength is grander. And my ultimate goal is that my message is heard and spread to those on opposing sides of the spectrum, to those that have lost someone through the immigration system. I hope that you feel seen. And to those that oppose immigration in general, I hope that my anecdote makes immigration and immigrants feel real, like real people. And so I would like to thank my mom and my dad, just immigrants, for guiding me to be here and for leading me to be the noble person that I am and for giving me familial values. So the end goal is that I become an immigration lawyer. Thank you, Mom and Dad. Yeah.
I want you all to imagine a 7-year-old version of yourselves. The version of you and you and you who played on the playground and laughed at jokes like Booger when the teacher left the classroom. And I want you to remember what it felt like to be 7, to be free, to have fun. No stress, no P-sets. And I want you to remember what that felt like. Be there in that moment. And I'm going to say a couple of words to you, and I want you to remember what it felt like to be 7 and hearing these words. Fat, ugly, die, kill yourself. Strange, you might be a little uncomfortable, you might be a little confused. I too was a 7-year-old girl. I had chubby round cheeks and slick back pigtails with bright pink bows. And those were the very words that were said to me. And throughout my life, I have learned that people don't ever really see me. They see this body, but they do not see me. They see this vessel that holds my spirit, but they don't see me. So today I'm going to tell you a story that's going to make you a little uncomfortable. You'll shift and you'll look at your friend and you'll be like, who's this lady? But I'm also going to tell you a story of joy. But the most important part of my story isn't the barriers that I jumped to get here. It is why I am here. When I was 7 years old, I walked into an ice cream shop with my father. And I was so excited. I had been playing on the playground all afternoon, and I was ready for that ice cream. And he looked down at me as we approached the stand and said, "Only one scoop for you. You're getting way too big." And in that moment, as I denied the ice cream because I saw the proud look on his face when I did, it had been the first time in my life that I had gotten the taste of validation for starving my body. And in that moment, a 7-year-old girl who was carefree and loving and hopeful for the world lost it all in the span of words. I was shattered. My world was shattered. But his comments didn't stop with him. They traveled through vessels of mean classmates and chat spaces like Kik, for those of you who remember. And I realized in those moments that no one wanted me. No one wanted a 7-year-old girl who just wanted to be loved and cared for because I was too fat to be loved. Because God forbid a 7-year-old felt love because it was more important how much she weighed than who she was. And at that age, at that small age, I almost became the 1 in 5 children under the age of 13 who kills themselves. So why am I here? How did I make it here? My mom. My mom, who was more beautiful than Aphrodite herself. My mother, who curated and gave me love with no borders. My beautiful, powerful mother who raised 3 children in a city where gun violence took kids' lives before it let them graduate. And in her love, she fostered an advocate. She'd fostered a voice for her community, a badass voice in her community. And in those times, I viewed my mother as someone who could be torn down by nothing. But even her rage, even her powerfulness, could not hide from fat phobia. At the age of 17, I heard my mother for the first time call herself fat in a connotation of ugly, and I was sure as hell confused. How could my mother, the most beautiful person in the world, think she was ugly? And then it hit me. I was never the problem. My mother was never the problem. Bigger-bodied people were never the problem. It was fat phobia. It was every person in this audience, whoever says, oh my God, I look so fat today. It is every person in this audience who says, wow, I just ate that burger. That was so fat of me. It's each and every one of you who participates in those activities that are a part of that problem. But it isn't just you. This isn't just a call out to each and all of you. This exists in our society in an institution like Harvard. Harvard, that has some of the most intelligent minds in the world, couldn't even hide its fat phobia. And in August of 2022, when I arrived on campus, confident, my head held high, knowing, okay, this is an institution that has racism and sexism, but fat phobia, I mean, we're bigger than that. Well, I was wrong. When I got here, I tried to get merchandise from the Harvard shop, and I even tried to model for it, because I'm cute, right? Yeah? But when I tried to model for them, they said I was too fat. And maybe not in those words, but in the way that their form to apply doesn't go above an extra large. The way that when I walk in looking for a t-shirt that says Harvard, they tell me, well, we might have to back order that. But it doesn't just exist in the Harvard shop. I mean, in all of your student organizations, when you go around giving merchandise, you tell me that your plus size is an XL, when the average size for an adult woman is an 18 in America. That's bullshit. So in that time, I decided it was time to make a change. I was done letting this extra large problem of fat phobia silence me. I was tired of it, and I was going to put a stop to it. So I started a TikTok account, because social media is the way to people's hearts nowadays. And that TikTok account to this day stands with over 90,000 followers. And in that account, I advocate for first-generation low-income students, students of color, fat people, and I show them, you belong here just like everyone else. You deserve a space here just like everyone else, and we exist here. But that TikTok account, as the comments flew in and the followers increased, so did the number of people who hated me. Not because they disagreed with what I was saying, but because they didn't like that I was fat. Because my fatness was enough to block the message that I was giving. So I decided I needed to do more. I needed to be seen. I was going to be seen. And that is when I decided to work for the Harvard Foundation of Intercultural and Race Relations, where I was one of 2 freshman interns when I applied and was accepted. And I realized I could use this to amplify my voice, to be seen. And in a community like Harvard that hosts bigger-bodied people, no one had ever thought about voicing bigger-bodied people, which was an insane idea to me. So I started the first ever bigger-bodied dialogue on this campus, where we had 14 to 20 undergraduates and graduate women who expressed the agonies and the joys that come with being a bigger-bodied person, and I had felt so empowered. I had realized we're here, and we exist, and we're happy to be here. And we weren't gonna let the fat phobia of this institution and of every person who's attending it stop us. But that wouldn't be the end of me. Back home, I continue my advocacy work through other vessels. I work closely with the mayor's office, I work closely with the kids back home, because I know that I am the voice that my community needs. Because while an institution like Harvard can't see past my fatness, a group of students who need someone to speak for them can. Because it isn't until you need a voice that you realize that you do not care what body that voice comes in. So the reason I stand here in front of all of you is because that 7-year-old girl who existed and who got her heart shattered deserved a voice. Because in my growth and in my healing and in my joys of being a proud Latina Arab fat woman, I have learned that this world is my arena. This voice is our arena. And I have learned that to all of my bigger bodied people who listen to this speech today, who hear me, who come to these events, I see you, and I know you're there. Do not let the extra large problem continue to silence you, because I will never let it silence me, and I will never let it silence us. So this is my call to action. Make sure that when you're in the student orgs, you are careful of where you're having events. Seaver does not hold normal bodied people. Make sure that you are providing merchandise for all people, not just the size zeros that walk around this campus. And make sure that when you're around your friends, you uplift them and don't deteriorate yourself using the connotation to describe who they are. I am here because I am proud of being a fat Latina woman, an Arab woman, and most importantly, because this extra large problem will never silence me again. Thank you.
Look around the room. Just take a moment and look around the room. Many of us in this room know or know of each other. We walk around Harvard Yard, along the river, even the quad, exchanging a smile or a wave. But we often don't know each other past the surface. This is why events like our narratives are crucial to our campus community. Our institution is currently at the center of a national stage, especially at this moment as we are at a moment of reckoning when it comes to thinking about identity, thinking about opportunity, thinking about things like what Allison talked to us about, building that pipeline. We are so proud to continue the Our Narratives program at this moment of time. And we hope that some of you in the audience will join us again in future semesters as we continue to develop this program. We also could not have made this program possible without the help of IOP Student President Amin Gasha, our executive team, the director of the Institute of Politics, Eddie Warren, the Senior Director of Administration, Laura Dove, Abby James, Augusta Durham, our staff, our comms team. Thank you, Layla. We also really are appreciative of the work that Tarina Ahuja did, the former Director of Diversity and Outreach, who really laid the groundwork for this event. And of course, this event would not have been possible without the 10 students who are in the front row here today, who invited all of us to share their stories, to listen to their stories, and to join us on their journeys of being public servants. We're now going to invite each of you guys up to the stage.
When we say your name and your title, please just walk up and please stay up. Reem Ali, Resisting Repression, A Journey of Grief, Trauma, and Healing Through the Lens of the Sudanese Revolution. Cody Chow, What Being a Coda Taught Me About Accessibility. Dalal Hassan, Reclaiming the Kurdish-Arab Mixed Identity. Allison Hunter, 4%. Ava Palada, The Politics of the Past Tense. Andre Ramsey, The Guilty Verdict. Elena Yu, Take Care of Each Other. Jasmine Safar, From the Heart of Asia to Germany. Cassandra Rodriguez Acosta, Immigration Beyond the Immigrant. And finally, Isabella Gonzalez Lawand, The Extra Large Problem. Congratulating our inspiring speakers today. Thank you guys so much, and we invite you guys all to room L166 for the reception. Thank you guys.